The security guard found him at 4:30 in the morning, curled up between two dumpsters behind the Grand Ole Opry House in Nashville. It was October 12th, 1974, and the temperature had dropped to 38 degrees. The man was wearing a faded green army jacket, one that had seen better days, with a name patch that read Thompson. His hair was long and unkempt, his beard wild, and when the security guard shook him awake, his eyes had that 1,000-yard stare that every Vietnam veteran knew too well. "You can't sleep here," the guard said, not unkindly. "Show's tonight. Johnny Cash. Place is going to be crawling with people in a few hours." The veteran, whose full name was James Robert Thompson, sat up slowly. His joints protested from the cold concrete. "Johnny Cash is playing here tonight?" His voice was rough, like sandpaper on wood. "Yeah, sold-out show. 19,000 tickets. Now come on, I gotta move you along." But James Thompson didn't move. Instead, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something the security guard didn't expect to see. It was a photograph, creased and worn from being handled so many times. The photo showed a younger Thompson in full combat gear, standing next to another soldier in Vietnam. But what made the guard pause was what Thompson said next. "Johnny Cash saved my life once, not metaphorically, literally saved my life." The security guard, whose name was Earl Watson, had heard a lot of stories in his 20 years working venue security. But something about the way Thompson said it, the absolute certainty in his voice, despite his current circumstances, made Earl stop. "How's that?" Earl asked, checking his watch. He had maybe 10 minutes before his supervisor would come around. Thompson looked at the photo again. 1969, Fire Support Base Ripcord near the A Shau Valley. You probably never heard of it. Hell on earth is what it was. We'd been under siege for 3 days straight. North Vietnamese army had us surrounded. Mortars coming in every few hours. We'd lost 14 men already. Thompson's hands shook slightly as he continued. "I was ready to eat my gun. I mean it. I had the barrel in my mouth. 21 years old and I was done. Couldn't take the screaming anymore, the smell of burned flesh, watching kids younger than me die calling for their mothers. And then, through all that chaos, I heard it." Heard what? Folsom Prison Blues. Someone had a transistor radio, and Armed Forces radio was playing Johnny Cash, that deep voice cutting through the explosions, singing about being stuck somewhere you can't escape. And I thought, if Johnny Cash could sing about prison like he understood it, really understood being trapped, maybe someone out there understood what we were going through too. Earl looked at his watch again, but found himself sitting down on a nearby crate. "So, you didn't pull the trigger, no. Listened to that whole song. Then they played Ring of Fire. By the time Walk the Line came on, the mortars had stopped. We got resupplied the next day. Made it out of that hellhole 2 weeks later, but I always said if I ever got the chance, I'd thank Johnny Cash for being there when I needed him most." Thompson laughed bitterly. "Course, look at me now. Been living in my car for 6 months until it got impounded last week. Now I'm sleeping behind dumpsters at the venue where he's playing to 19,000 people. Some thank you, right?" Earl Watson stood up. He should have escorted Thompson off the property 5 minutes ago. Instead, he said something that would change everything. "Wait here, don't move. I mean it, I'll be back in 10 minutes. Thompson watched the security guard hurry off, probably to get the police, he figured. But he was too tired to run, too tired to care. He'd been tired since 1970. What Thompson didn't know was that Earl Watson's own son had come back from Vietnam 2 years earlier, came back different, came back broken. And Earl had watched his boy struggle every single day since. So Earl didn't go to get the police. He went to find Saul Holiff, Johnny Cash's manager, who was already at the venue preparing for the evening's show. "Mr. Holiff," Earl said, catching the manager near the loading dock, "I need 2 minutes of your time. It's important." Saul Holiff was a busy man. The show was in 14 hours, and there were 1,000 details to handle. But something in Earl's voice made him stop. Earl told him about Thompson. About the photograph, about fire support base Ripcord, and the transistor radio, and the gun that didn't get fired because Johnny Cash's voice cut through the chaos. Holiff listened, his expression unreadable. "Where is this man now?" Holiff asked. "Behind the venue, sir, by the dumpsters." Holiff pulled out a cigarette, lit it, took a long drag. "Cash isn't here yet. Won't be until soundcheck at 4. And even if he was..." He paused. "You know how many people want to meet Johnny? How many stories like this we hear? I understand, sir, but this one's different. I can feel it." Holiff studied Earl's face. "You served? Korea. 51 to 53. That changed something in Holiff's expression. "Keep him here. I'll see what I can do. No promises." 6 hours later, Johnny Cash arrived at the Grand Ole Opry House. He was tired. The tour had been grueling, 47 shows in 60 days. His body ached, his voice was rough, and he had 19,000 people expecting a show that night. The last thing he needed was another distraction. But Saul Holiff knew his client, knew him better than most, and he knew exactly how to approach this. "John," he said, using the familiar name only close friends used, "there's something you should know. There's a veteran out back, Vietnam, living rough. He's got a story about you." Cash was applying black stage makeup around his eyes, his pre-show ritual. "Saul, you know I can't meet every fan who... He says you saved his life at Firebase Ripcord. Says your music on Armed Forces radio stopped him from killing himself during a siege." Cash's hand stopped moving. He set down the makeup brush. Firebase Ripcord. He knew that name. June of 1970 had been one of the bloodiest battles American forces faced in Vietnam. He'd specifically requested that Armed Forces Radio play his music more frequently during that period, knowing boys were dying over there. "Where is he?" "Still out back. Security's been keeping an eye on him." Cash stood up. He was dressed in his performance clothes already, the all-black outfit that had become his signature. "Bring him in." "John, the show's in 3 hours. You need to..." "Bring him in, Saul." And when James Thompson was escorted into Johnny Cash's dressing room, he thought he was hallucinating. Lack of sleep, malnutrition, the PTSD that haunted his every waking moment. Surely this wasn't real. But then Johnny Cash stood up, walked over, and extended his hand. "I'm told you were at Ripcord," Cash said simply. Thompson couldn't speak. He just nodded. "Sit down, son. Tell me about it." For the next hour, Thompson talked, really talked. For the first time since coming home, he told someone who seemed to genuinely want to hear about the horror, the fear, the guilt of surviving when so many didn't. Cash listened, occasionally asking questions, never judging. When Thompson got to the part about the transistor radio, about Folsom Prison Blues, playing while he had a gun in his mouth, Cash's eyes filled with tears. "You know," Cash said quietly, "I recorded that song in 55. Never thought it would mean anything to anyone but convicts and people who felt trapped. Never imagined it would reach a soldier in Vietnam thinking about ending it all." "It reached me," Thompson said. "Your voice. It was like you understood, like somebody back home understood." Cash was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Where are you staying these days, James?" Thompson looked down at his dirty clothes, his worn boots. "Around, here and there." "He was sleeping by the dumpsters when security found him," Saul Holiff interjected from the corner of the room. Cash's jaw tightened. Here was a man who had served his country, who had survived one of the bloodiest battles of the war, and he was sleeping behind dumpsters while 19,000 people were about to pay good money to hear Cash sing. "You still have that photograph?" Cash asked. "The one from Vietnam?" Thompson pulled it out, handed it over with shaking hands. Cash studied it carefully. "Who's this next to you?" "Tommy Rodriguez. Didn't make it home. Died 2 days after that picture was taken." Cash handed the photo back carefully, like it was made of glass. Then he made a decision that would ripple through the country music world and beyond. "James, you're going to watch the show tonight, from the wings, right beside the stage. Then you're going to have dinner with me and June after, and we're going to figure out how to get you back on your feet. Mr. Cash, look at me. I am looking at you. I see a man who survived hell and came home to a country that forgot about him. Well, I haven't forgotten. We're going to get you cleaned up. Saul, call that men's store on Broadway. Tell them to send over their best outfit in... He looked at Thompson. What's your size, son? I don't even remember. We'll figure it out and get him a hotel room for tonight. Actually, make it a week. No, make it a month. John... Saul started to protest, thinking about budgets and schedules. A month, Saul. And call that veterans organization June's been working with. Set up a meeting for tomorrow. Thompson was crying now. Tough, battle-hardened James Thompson was sobbing like a child. Why? Why are you doing this? Cash put his hand on Thompson's shoulder. Because you boys went through hell for this country, and the least we can do is make sure you don't have to sleep next to dumpsters when you come home. And because... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Because my music was there for you when you needed it. Now it's time for me to be here when you need it. 2 hours later, James Thompson stood in the wings of the Grand Ole Opry House, wearing a new suit that fit him perfectly, freshly shaved and showered, watching Johnny Cash walk onto the stage to thunderous applause from 19,000 people. Cash grabbed the microphone, waited for the crowd to quiet down. Then, instead of launching into his opening number, he spoke. Before we start tonight, I want to tell you all about a man I met today, a hero. His name is James Thompson, and he served in Vietnam at a place called Firebase Ripcord. Some of you might have heard of it. One of the worst battles our boys faced over there. The crowd grew completely silent. This wasn't how Johnny Cash shows usually started. James told me something today that's going to stay with me for the rest of my life. He told me that during the worst of the fighting, when death was all around him and he didn't think he could go on, he heard my music on Armed Forces radio. He heard Folsom Prison Blues, and something about that song, about knowing someone else understood what it felt like to be trapped, gave him the strength to keep going. Cash paused, his voice thick with emotion. James made it home, but home hasn't been kind to him. Like too many of our veterans, he's been sleeping rough, forgotten by the country he served. Well, not anymore. Not on my watch. James, would you come out here for a moment? Thompson froze. 19,000 people. He couldn't move. June Carter Cash appeared beside him in the wings. Go on, honey, she whispered. They need to see you. They need to remember. Somehow, Thompson's legs carried him onto the stage. The spotlight hit him, and for a moment, he was back in Vietnam, frozen in fear. But then Cash put his arm around Thompson's shoulders, and the fear melted away. This is James Thompson, Cash said to the crowd. This is what a hero looks like. What happened next was something nobody who was there would ever forget. One person started clapping, then another, then another. Within seconds, all 19,000 people were on their feet, applauding with such force that the building itself seemed to shake. The ovation went on for 3 full minutes. Grown men were crying, women were cheering, and James Thompson, who hadn't felt valued by anyone since 1970, stood there absorbing it all. When the crowd finally settled down, Cash spoke again. James is going to watch the show from right over there tonight. He pointed to the wings. And I'm dedicating this first song to him and to every veteran who's ever felt forgotten. This is Folsom Prison Blues. As Cash launched into the song, Thompson stood in the wings, tears streaming down his face. But these weren't tears of sadness or despair. These were tears of recognition, of validation, of finally being seen. The show that night was legendary. Cash performed with an intensity and passion that even his longtime band members had rarely seen. Every song seemed to carry extra weight, extra meaning, and throughout it all, he kept glancing over at Thompson in the wings, making sure he was still there, still okay. After the show, true to his word, Cash took Thompson to dinner. But it wasn't just Cash and June. He'd invited several music industry executives, the head of a veterans organization, and a journalist from Rolling Stone who happened to be covering the tour. "James needs a job," Cash announced to the table. "A real job, with dignity and purpose. Who's going to help me make that happen?" By the end of dinner, Thompson had 3 job offers and an apartment lined up, paid for 6 months in advance by an anonymous donor who everyone knew was Cash himself. But the story doesn't end there. 2 weeks later, Cash appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Carson asked him about the tour, about the new album, the usual questions. Then Cash interrupted. "Johnny, can I tell you about something that happened in Nashville 2 weeks ago?" He told the whole story, about Thompson, about Firebase Ripcord, about the transistor radio and the song that saved a life. He told it to millions of Americans watching at home. "We've got thousands of boys coming home from Vietnam," Cash said, looking directly into the camera. "They're not all sleeping behind dumpsters, but too many of them are struggling. They went through hell for this country. The least we can do is make sure they have a soft place to land when they come home." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Donations poured into veterans organizations. Other celebrities began seeking out veterans to help. And James Thompson, who had been invisible for 4 years, became a symbol of both the forgotten veteran and the power of compassion. Thompson went on to work for a veterans advocacy organization, helping other Vietnam vets transition back to civilian life. He spoke at conferences, testified before Congress, and never forgot the moment when 19,000 people stood and applauded not for Johnny Cash, but for him and what he represented. Cash and Thompson stayed in touch until Cash's death in 2003. Thompson was at the funeral, in the front row with family, because that's what he had become, family. Years later, Thompson would tell interviewers, "Johnny Cash didn't just give me a job or a place to live. He gave me back my dignity. He reminded me that I mattered, that what I'd been through mattered. And when those 19,000 people stood up and applauded, it wasn't just for me. It was for every veteran who'd been forgotten, overlooked, or pushed aside. The security guard, Earl Watson, who found Thompson that cold morning. Cash made sure he got a promotion and a raise. "You saw a human being when everyone else would have just seen a problem," Cash told him. "That's the kind of security this venue needs." The photograph Thompson carried, the one of him and Tommy Rodriguez in Vietnam, Cash had it professionally restored and framed. It now hangs in the Country Music Hall of Fame, part of an exhibit on artists who've supported veterans. Below it is a plaque that reads, "Music saves lives in ways we never expect. James Thompson, Firebase Ripcord, 1969. Here's the thing about that night at the Grand Ole Opry House. It wasn't filmed. This was before everyone had cameras in their pockets. But all 19,000 people who were there remembered it. They told their children and grandchildren about the night Johnny Cash brought a homeless veteran on stage, and an entire arena erupted in recognition of service and sacrifice. Some moments in history are recorded in books and film. Others are recorded in hearts. The night Johnny Cash heard that a Vietnam veteran was living in the venue parking lot and brought him on stage to 19,000 cheering fans. That's both kinds of history. It's the kind of story that reminds us that fame and fortune mean nothing if we can't use them to lift up those who've fallen. It's the kind of story that proves one person really can make a difference in another person's life. But perhaps most importantly, it's a story about the power of being seen, really seen, not just looked at, but recognized, valued, and embraced. James Thompson had been invisible since he came home from Vietnam. In one night, Johnny Cash made him visible again, not just to 19,000 people in that arena, but to a nation that needed to remember its forgotten heroes. Today, there's a foundation in Thompson's name that helps homeless veterans. It's funded partially by royalties from a song Cash wrote about that night, called "The Soldier in the Parking Lot." The song went to #1 on the country charts and raised over $2 million for veterans' causes. Thompson lived until 2018, passing away at the age of 70. At his funeral, they played Folsom Prison Blues. His daughter spoke about how her father went from being broken to becoming a voice for the voiceless, all because one famous man decided that no veteran should have to sleep behind a dumpster. The question is, what parking lots do we walk past every day? What invisible people do we fail to see? What James Thompsons are sleeping behind our dumpsters while we go about our lives? Johnny Cash saw one man and changed his life. But more than that, he reminded 19,000 people, and eventually millions more, that every person who served and suffered deserves to be seen, heard, and helped. That's the power of compassion. That's the power of recognition. That's the power of one person saying, "Not on my watch." If this story moved you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear it. Someone out there needs to know that their service mattered, that their struggle is seen, that their life has value. And maybe, just maybe, someone watching this has the power to be somebody else's Johnny Cash, to see the invisible, to lift up the fallen, to bring someone from the parking lot to the stage. What will you do with that power? Leave a comment below about a time when someone saw you, when you felt invisible, or a time when you were able to truly see someone else. These stories matter. They remind us that we're all connected, that we all have the power to change a life, even if we're not Johnny Cash with 19,000 people ready to cheer. Remember, heroes aren't just on battlefields. Sometimes they're behind dumpsters, and sometimes heroes are the ones who take the time to look.